One of the easiest looks to transfer from one pattern to the other is the shape of the neckline. Today's fun because the pattern I'm using has a neckline that's rounded. We're going to transform that easily into a square neckline and a V neckline. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing. Today we're going to be playing around with necklines, doing a bit of manipulation, changing around. I think it's something really enjoyable that can help you enjoy your pieces even more. If you have certain patterns and you want to mix the features up a little bit, it can take your patterns a long way. The pattern I'm playing with today is the Lincoln from Love Notions. This was a pattern released last year in March. The Lincoln is the feature Friday today at Love Notions, and that means it's only $5. That's about 60% off the regular price, and it can even cost less if you use my code lifting10 at the checkout. You get an extra 10% off. Don't forget to use my code and click on my link to go directly there. I think it's a really cute original pattern, different, really different. I already do have content on the channel that takes you through the whole pattern, including the sewing, so that's linked below as well. It's got a back piece that's wider and that comes over and overlaps towards the front, but not straight down. Diagonally like this, you have a button placket, and the front piece is narrower and it has that shape going in like that. The shoulder seam is slightly dropped here, so it doesn't reach your joint. It's a little further, and you can really tell when you see a sleeve piece where the sleeve cap is a little flatter. That immediately tells you that the style is more dropped, because if it was at the shoulder, then you would have the typical sleeve that has a taller sleeve cap. So with this sleeve, you do have a shape. It's not a rectangle, it's just a little flatter. Last time I made it sleeveless. Back then I only had time to make one piece. I usually sew multiples, but there were things going on and I just couldn't humanly make any more than one, and I always knew I wanted to make more. This is my Lincoln top from Love Notions, size extra large. You can see me undoing the last button of this diagonal placket on both sides. I love this ponte print, it's super comfortable, and this top reaches the high hip length. There is another version that is cropped. Here's a closer look at the placket. I have 6 buttons on each side. It's all very neat. My buttons are sewn through the placket, except for the last one. There is an actual buttonhole there. The top is not too loose or boxy. I'm very happy with the fit. I chose the sleeveless option, and there's a nice amount of cover here on the arm. I've got the scoop neckline. There is one that's slightly higher. I think this is very nice. I like this depth, and I have binding inside. Very neat. I'm super glad I tried this new to me style. I had a lot of fun sewing it. It's not hard at all, and it's a different style, different techniques. And the best thing is that I used less than a yard of fabric, and that is golden. This time I've made 2 more. I already have a video on the channel all about it, a full pattern review that talks about how to choose your sizing, what the best fabrics are, and the sewing. So last year's video is super complete. If you don't know about this pattern and you watch that one, you will know all about it and how to sew it. And so I'm not going to repeat that content. I have different content for you today. When I was in the process of choosing my fabrics and the looks I wanted, I started thinking about changing the necklines, and yeah, I thought that would be something interesting, maybe something you would want to do. Otherwise, you can just make it as is. So in this opportunity, for the fun, I want to change 2 things. I want to change the neckline, and I want to change the length. I want to make it a little bit longer. Let's play around with the necklines first. You can see that the neckline there is rounded, and there's 2 heights there, one that is a little higher, one that is a little lower. This is the one I made last year. You can see it's quite open here, but this doesn't look wide because the style is a little bit dropped right here. So this doesn't look wide, but the neck is around here, so it's further away from the neck. It's not a boat neck as such, and you can see here how this original neckline looks. I do want to show you how you can easily change this from that rounded neckline to a V. Super easy. Now it's easier to do when you already have the original garment made. So you can see my original garment there, made as is, no changes. This is the lower neckline option. And from here I can measure down. I want to take it down about 3 inches where the point of the V is going to be. It's not going to be as low as you think, because the V neckband is going to add an inch higher up when you sew it on. So touching there, I sort of know where I like my V's to hit. I never want them plunging, and I don't want them up here. It's right there on my sternum, you know, on the bone right there. Super easy to change on the original pattern piece. I only want to change the front. I don't want to change the back. I just want to keep the back the same. I do have a full video showing you how to actually add on the V neckline when you modify it from another pattern. So in this case, you don't have a V neckband piece. In that video, you get to know how you can download some free templates from my website, and I have the full instruction. When you've sewn already your shoulder seams, you can measure that neckline. You can just fold it in half, of course, and just measure that at the seam line. If you're going to sew your neckband at 1/4 inch, you measure the length of that neckline 1/4 inch away from the edge, and then you do your calculations, and then you add on your V neckband. So that is already content I have on the channel. I just wanted to show you what I actually did to this specific pattern piece from the Lincoln top to make it a V. Now, to get a square neckline, I could have eyeballed that myself, but I know a lot of you don't like to eyeball things and you prefer to have pattern pieces. So I did something even easier, which is match the neckline of the Saltwhistle, peplum and dress. The Saltwhistle was a pattern from Love Notions released last year around August, around there. I made 2 and I love that square neckline. It's finished with a facing, and don't think you can't do a facing with a knit. You can. It's totally doable, and this is what I've done this time. The Saltwhistle is for wovens. It does really work, but then again, the Lincoln is not really fitted either. You don't have negative V's at the bust or anything. So if I compared the pattern pieces one on top of each other, they sort of have the same width at the armhole here towards the center. So I thought, yeah, it's appropriate. I can mash these 2 together. I wouldn't be happy about mashing the neckline to another pattern when there's a lot of discrepancy in the size. So for example, if this top was really fitted and had a lot of negative V's, piece was much smaller than my original one, then I wouldn't be happy to do it. But these 2, they work perfect. So let's see a little bit of a play with the pattern pieces. This is the front piece of my Lincoln top, and you can see that this is the neckline here. I have a pink paper underneath already stuck there to fill up the space, and I want to modify it and use the square neckline from the Saltwhistle. And before I try to match any neckline, I just make sure that the pattern pieces are sort of similar size. So if I just quickly put this on top, I can see and match up the center fronts. I do have a very similar width between the 2 patterns, so I know that the neckline is not going to be distorted and it's going to work. So I'm going to take my facing piece. I've matched the center of the facing here, and I've matched the shoulder. It's never going to have the exact same angle. From the angle I have on the Lincoln at the bottom, I'm just going to extend the line in the angle, and now I'm just going to copy the neckline. Now you can see that there's a discrepancy with the angle of the facing and the Lincoln. I do want to keep the same angle of the Lincoln. I don't want to have a curve right there. I had my facing placed right there, and I just traced the outline with a pen, and I can really see it nicely. And I've just put another paper behind there, and I'm just going to use this. It's going to leave a nice little mark on the other side. Maybe you can see the little dots that you get with this type of tracing wheel. So I am going to keep this, and I am going to tape it back together once I'm done with this, because I still want to have the original neckline there as a reference. But let's just put that aside. This is going to be my facing for this square neckline. It'll be on the fold, the same as the front piece, and that was super easy. I know it's going to work. And now I'm going to do the same with the back. This is the back. Of course, we have a different neckline here. It's more shallow than the front one, of course, and I do want my shoulder seams to match. So I'm going to align this. So I've drawn that little angle there in blue so you can see it, and I want that to match this one right here from the front. And I'm going to make a mark here where the facing stops so that I have the same amount added basically. So I'm just going to take that out. I'm going to take my ruler and just extend this shoulder. This is the facing for the Saltwhistle, so I want that to match. And so all I need to do is place this right here and match it up to the center. Again, I have a little bit of a different angle here, so I am going to be drawing a new facing for this one. So the same as I did with the other one, I'm just going to put an extra paper here and trace my facing out. So this is going to be my new back piece. All that's changed here basically is extending it closer to the neck. The front and the back facing have the same length right here, so those are going to match and everything's going to be good. I'm ready to cut out these facings for this modified Lincoln, and you can see that when I was making these facings I just had half of them, that's a yellow paper, but then I added more and I created a full extended piece. It's easier to cut and I think more accurate. So I've done the same here for the front. I'm using a sweater knit, it's navy, and on the other side I have already fused tricot knit interfacing that has a little bit of give. It's that stretchy type of interfacing. And as usual, I'm block fusing. I've just cut a piece of fabric slightly bigger than what I'm going to need. I've already got that fused, and now I'm going to go ahead and cut my facing pieces. I find that these knits react a lot to the glue on the interfacing, and I've learned this by trial and error in the past, where I've turned out with smaller facings and smaller pieces by trying to fuse them separately. Whenever I'm making something out of a sweater knit, I always like stabilizing the shoulders because I think they can really stretch out, especially if you're going to add sleeves. I've just cut my little strips of interfacing that don't stretch, fusible, and I'm just going to fuse them along the shoulder here on the back. I'll usually use this method when I know I'm going to be sewing the shoulder seams with the actual sewing machine using the 3/8 seam allowance. In other cases, when I'm sewing the shoulder seams directly on the serger, then as I serge, I sew in a piece of ribbon. Here is the back, right sides up. There you can see where I stabilize the shoulders to make it a square neckline and to match the facing and the shape of the Saltwhistle. This came in closer to the neck there. So now I'm going to bring my front and just put it together, right sides together. When I have one layer that's stabilized and the other one isn't, I like to keep the stable area on top that will touch the presser foot, and the non-stable area will touch the feed dogs. And that's how you can prevent this from stretching out. So if I sewed like this could stretch out potentially with the use of the presser foot, but if it's this way, it stays really stable. And here you can see that this one has a little tag coming out from the back. This is the front piece, but where the seam line is going to be, they're both right there on the edge. I'm using a sweater knit, so I'm going to use a jersey needle number 90. There are some areas where I'm going to go through a few layers. My sweater knit is not too light, so I'm going to go ahead and sew this with a 3/8 seam allowance on the sewing machine. And because I have a stable shoulder seam that won't stretch, I will just use a straight stitch. This is not an area of the garment where you need it to stretch. Here you can see that I'm sewing at 3/8. I cut the interfacing here to stabilize the shoulder at 1/2 inch, so it's a little wider than the 3/8 seam allowance I'm sewing so that I'm catching the interfacing. Here we have the back facing for the square neckline, and here we have the front facing interfaced. So just put them right sides together and we're going to sew these shoulder seams. You don't need to serge anything, you just sew them, and I'm going to press them open. 3/8 seam allowance. Okay, so now we have a completed facing. Square is very apparent there. I'm just going to press these seams open. I am going to clean it up and serge around the outer edge. I think it's just going to look neater. And then we can sew this onto the neckline of the top. As I serge the outer edges of this facing, I'm really trying not to trim anything away because I do want to keep the original shape and width of the facing and then top stitch. So I really don't want to deform the shape by accidentally trimming some away. Here is my top, here is the neckline. I would usually prioritize the neckline before doing side seams or sleeves or anything. It's usually easier to do when you don't have the side seams sewn. If this was a woven fabric, I would have stay stitched this as one of the first steps to prevent it going out of shape. I don't stay stitch with knits. I think it can actually stretch it out even more, especially around these horizontal areas where the fabric has more stretch than the vertical. That is something I'll never do. I'll just be careful with handling it. I wouldn't try this on without having the neckline finished already. Just think about that. It is slightly different to the woven. So keeping the top right sides up, I'm going to bring my facing. I've got my facing, I've also put a pin in the center front and in the center back, and now it's just a matter of aligning them together following the shape. Because I have to navigate corners and curves and all those types of shapes here on this neckline, I just decided to hand baste, which is what I end up doing in like 90% of my projects anyway. Super easy. I'm just taking stitches within the seam allowance that I'm going to use, so it's going to be easy to remove later. There it is, hand basted. I drew little dots where I need to pivot. I'd rather have the dots there than just eyeball that when I'm sewing, so it's nice and accurate. I will be using the sewing machine. I'll use a narrow zigzag. That's a zigzag. Narrow means it's going to be almost flat, so that is almost flat. And here the length of the stitch, I'm going to use anywhere from 2.5 to 3. Now I'm just going to go ahead and sew with 3/8 seam allowance. Here you can see the dot where I'm pivoting carefully. I really want that to be exact. When you get to shoulder seams, make sure the seams match and that the seam allowance from the main shoulder seam is pointing towards the back. That was sewn. It's always a nice experience without the pins, and now because I did this within the seam allowance, it can come flying off really easily. The back is curved, so I'm going to snip here. front here where it's straight, I'm not snipping there because that's straight, but I do need to snip into this corner, to the corner, but not through it. And same as this corner over here. That's all I need to snip. Now, so this facing stays inside and looks really neat. I will never skip the understitching. I'll always do it whether it's a woven or a knit fabric. Seam allowance is always pointing towards the facing when you understitch, and you just sew on the edge right there. Here on the corners, I'm not going to understitch all the way. I'm probably going to stop about 3/8 of an inch before the corner and then start again there. As I'm understitching, I'm always touching and moving the seam allowance underneath. This fabric is particularly slippery. It wants to go to another direction. Before I top stitch the facing down, I want it to be really flat, so I don't want to be lifting this to pin it or to baste it. The first thing for me is to match these, so that's the starting point, and then everything flat like this. I pin it and then I baste it while keeping it flat, and I'll do half, and then I'll move the fabric, make sure the other half is all flat, and I just go around the whole thing. It takes a little while. You can see that I'm not lifting my fabric to baste this. I'm keeping it right here on the table. This is my secret to get facings that are top stitched really neatly. I'm going to be top stitching from the wrong side because I don't really think it makes a huge difference. Now that I've done that half of the back, I'm just going to scoot the fabric over and then do the other side. As you can see, all these little extra steps take time. I'm not in a rush. I'm not racing against anyone. My projects are definitely slow sewing projects. It doesn't take me 1 hour to make a top like this. It will take me much longer because I do all these little things. I think it's worth it to get a really neat facing. It's so noticeable, it's close to your face, and a square neckline is going to be really striking and going to frame your face a lot, so I really want to do my best here. And I mean, this is not going to take more than 5 minutes to do, and it's totally worth it. Okay, so the back's done and that's super neat, and now I'm just going to keep going with the front. Do one half first and then the other half, and then I'll be ready to top stitch. Here it is. It's all hand basted flat. It's really neat. I know I'm going to be happy with the result. You can see the understitching is keeping the facing towards the wrong side. The corners are clean because I didn't understitch around the corner. I stopped there and then started there. Now I'm just going to top stitch with my narrow zigzag. It's going to look like a straight stitch, and I'll just go around the edge. I'll do it from the wrong side because I can control the fabric better. Also, my stable layer, which is the interfaced one, is on the top, and I'd like to keep it there. From the right side, my stitch is going to look exactly the same, so I don't really mind. If you like to sew and you find this content helpful, please like the video and don't forget to subscribe. Remember, I wanted to change two things, the necklines and the length. You can see my original version on here in my sewing room. I had already added 1.5 inches to this one, and you can see a diagram there of where I did it. I actually used the original shorten and lengthen line that the pattern has, which is sort of at the waist, a little above the waist, below the bust, around that area, and I added 1.5 inches. Now, when you separate pieces that have a slant like this, they do get distorted on that slant, and the more you add there, the more distorted it becomes. So here you can see a diagram of how you would see the distortion on the side, on the pink line. You would see where you'd have to blend these pieces to get that diagonal line on both the front and the back piece. And you see that you need to trim away some, a little bit from the top, a little bit from the bottom. It has a lot of discrepancy. So I think you can get away with adding 1.5 inches like that, like I did originally, like this, and using that shorten and lengthen line. But I think if you want to add a little bit more, you would have to divide it in two places, and then it gets a little different. Let me show you the original top on with already 1.5 inches added. And I'm just feeling, you know, looking at myself in the mirror of the camera, how much I want to add. And you can see there that about 1.5 inches would be okay, which is about 4 centimeters. That's what I would be happier with. Still be at the mid hip. It wouldn't be at the full hip, but definitely the width at the bottom would need to be a little bit more compared to the one that was at the high hip, because at least me, I do have that shape. Like my hips do come out like this. It's not straight. So I do definitely get wider as I reach the full hip. That's how my body is, so have to consider that when I want to add that length. Here on this new diagram, you can see that I've got a second shorten and lengthen line, and I did that one about 2 inches above the original hemline so I can keep all the shapes. I just cut across on the same place on the front and the back. But instead of keeping the grain line arrow marked on the pattern the same, which is what I did when I lengthened it at the top, this time I wanted to keep those diagonal angles the same. And so I had to scoot them off to the side. Because it scoots to the side to meet the angle going out in the same way, your pattern piece doesn't reach the center back there. That's why you have all that dark pink area marked there. That's fine. It's just going to give me that extra width I need, following the shape it would have, like A-lined, for that extra 1.5 inches that I want to add. And then for the front, when you keep that angle, it's the inverse. You know, your pattern piece scoots over towards the center front and it goes over it a little bit, so you lose a little bit of width there on the center front. But that doesn't matter because it's compensated to what you've added at the center back. So then you end up with really smooth lines, and that's how I thought it was going to be appropriate to add length in 2 places when I wanted to add a bit more, because 1.5, it is 3 inches in total. It's quite a lot, and I don't want to deform the piece. I also want to make sure it's going to fit my mid hip. So let me show you the 2 new versions I've made. One is a sleeveless version. I had a tiny remnant of a really gorgeous sweater knit with a houndstooth print. I really love it. I have a long sleeve sweater with that fabric, but I can always use a sleeveless one, and this is a totally different style. I chose to make my neckband and armband with rib knit because I knew the band was going to add about 3/4 of an inch to the width here. I cut that amount away from the armhole. So I did that after I'd done the garment. Like, I'd sewn the garment, I measured the 3¼ inches all the way around the front, the back, and I just trimmed it away. Then I measured that armhole and calculated my band according to that, and then sewed it on. And then I don't get like this sleeveless thing that's down here, because that's not the point, right? I love the V. I think the depth of it is really appropriate. I think it's really pretty. I'm so glad I had a little bit of this rib knit left over from making an Arlington top last year. Here is the band. You can see that that's what adds the height there. So that's why I trimmed away the 3/4 of an inch, so that I end up sort of with the original shape there, and this doesn't end up too wide. I don't top stitch my bands, as you know. I just press them, and I think it looks so much neater. And then we have this diagonal placket. These are the buttons I've chosen. I think they're really pretty, and I've just sewn them through. I didn't do any buttonholes, so that's loose, and it will just give me a bit of ease, and it will just let you show the features of the top when you wear it. I took a lot of care to match the houndstooth across these 2 pieces, so I didn't want them to be not in the same level, if you know what I mean. The pattern matching for me is really important when I'm sewing stripes and houndstooth. I know I would be really unhappy if this didn't match. This is the second Lincoln I've made, and I made it as a sleeveless sweater vest. It is a sweater knit, and I love this print. I think this is a really fun sew with that diagonal button placket. This is sleeveless, and I've modified the neckline to be a V, as you can see there. I added my own V neckband. I used rib knit for that, and I used it also on the armholes. I really love the gray and the black. I think this is a classic print, and I'm glad I had a tiny piece of fabric where I was able to make this. This one looks a little bit more fitted because I do have a layer underneath. I would usually wear this on its own. I have the last button there undone, and I didn't really sew the buttonholes. I just sewed the buttons right through the placket. I think it's really fun to put together, and it's an original design, so I really enjoyed it. Here's the same Lincoln, only without the top underneath. So I think this shows the real fit, because this is not meant to be worn with something underneath. This is a size extra large. I've added 3 inches extra to the length, but I've added them in 2 separate sections so to not deform the diagonal pieces. I know I'm gonna wear it sleeveless like this also, because this sweater knit isn't too thick or too hot. I love it. I think it's really fun to put together, super different to other things that you make. And it's just so elevated, I find. It's like an elevated little vest. This is my gorgeous new Lincoln with a square neckline. It's a sweater knit as well. Navy. It looks a little lighter here on camera, but it is darker. I'm glad it looks lighter because you can really see. The facing underneath is top stitched. You see that I really take a lot of time to hand base that flat, and I'm really careful that that lies as nice as it can. The understitching keeps that facing inside. Here you can see the drop shoulder. This is the only one I've sewn that has the sleeve. So it's a little further than the shoulder. I think the shoulder is like around there. It's not like a dolman. Here is the diagonal placket. For this one I did buttonholes as decoration, but I didn't actually open them. I just sewed the buttons through anyway. And I've chosen these buttons that are not circles. They're not metal, they're plastic, but I think they look really cool. And this one is open right there. At the back, super simple. You can see the facing right there that's been top stitched. Maybe when it's cold, you don't want to wear a neckline that's square that shows a bit of your chest. It's never that cold for me, and if I do get a little cold, I just put like a little scarf or something. So this is perfect. I think it's beautiful. This is my third version of the Lincoln top. I made it in a navy blue sweater knit. It's very drapey, lighter weight than the other sweater knit. I still have the extra 3 inches added in 2 separate areas, and I have the long sleeves on this one. Here you can see that because it's a drapey fabric, you'll see a few diagonal lines that are typical from just the lack of a dart, but you won't really see a dart in most knit projects, especially with this one that has the plackets on the side. I really love the contrast buttons. I have the last one undone. I hacked the square neckline from the Saltwhistle peplum, and I think it's amazing. I've always loved square necklines, and it was really easy to match these 2 patterns. I have a facing, it's top stitched, the facing is interfaced, and it's super neat. Here is a closer look. I took great care to hand base that down before top stitching so that it's super flat. You can see that the shoulder seam is slightly dropped. I have a long sleeve there. I added an inch extra to the length. Navy is a staple color for me. I love it. This knit is so soft. So I can't really show the 3 of them at the same time, but yeah, I'm really happy with them. I have one for summer, like I can wear this in the summer. This is going to be awesome for in-between weather. You know, I could still wear it sleeveless if I want, or just put a light layer under. And this one's also for in-between weather. It's going to be so nice. I think they're so pretty and different, and it was a real blast to sew them up. I think the second time I revisit a pattern is always so much fun because I just have time to think about it and add my little spin to it, and I love that. That's so fun. Don't forget that the Lincoln pattern is only $5 today, only today, Friday. Get it through my link down below. It is an affiliate link. I hope this was a fun one, and I hope you have a great weekend. I'll see you again very soon with more sewing. Bye.